Welcome to AIBC. I am extremely excited to be talking to Gordon Einstein again from CryptoLaw Partners. Gordon, you've become a firm favorite of ours here at Sigma. How are you doing?
I'm honored and blessed to become a firm favorite because I think there's a lot of contenders. This is definitely a popular organization. I am doing well. The world has reopened to me recently, as we'll talk about. So, no longer necessarily stuck in somewhat beautiful Los Angeles, California, but the world is kind of becoming my oyster again a bit. So, but a big part of it is.
Hang on a second, you're teasing me there. You're teasing me. You're telling me that you're going to tell me something. Gordon, what's your big news? What's the news in the world of crypto this week? What's going on?
The news in the world of crypto this week, well, my news is for everyone who's in Dubai or going to be in Dubai this week, reach out to me now, please, because I want to meet you. Okay, first time in Dubai, amazing place. We'll talk about it more later, but as beyond the place, I want to meet the people. So this is a opportunity that I didn't see coming, and it developed very quickly, and I'm thrilled and excited, and it kind of validates the hunker down and work hard strategy that I adopted during this COVID period. Because the idea is once things loosened up slightly, I'd be able to sort of burst forth, and it's working that way. And part of it is having good conversations with people like you, which I very much appreciate. And let's go from there.
Wow! So hang on. Let me get this right. You're traveling.
Yes.
That's amazing. I'm so jealous. I mean, great for you. But as you mentioned before, you're in Dubai, and there's a collection together of people, like-minded people. And I'm so pleased for you. We will touch on that a little bit later on. We're talking about DAO today. And for me, it's a big question. It's also a big topic. And it's something I really can't quite get my head around. So let me, I went to the source of all knowledge, which is Wikipedia. Let me read a quote to you. And let's see if you can put light on and shed some light on this subject. Here's the quote. A decentralized autonomous organization, so a DAO, sometimes labeled as a decentralized autonomous corporation, is an organization represented by rules encoded as a computer program that is transparent, controlled by the organization members, and not influenced by a central government. Now, the minute we talk about decentralization or not being governed, sounds to me like a revolution. We mentioned this word revolution when we spoke before. Why do we need this? Why do we need a revolution? And why would we want this?
So great questions. There's a lot, you're right, there's a lot to unpack here. So why are DAOs interesting? Why is the DAO format something we should look at? And I have a fundamental thesis about this, which is for human beings to accomplish anything at scale, not just in their backyard, but at scale, building a nuclear power plant, building a dam, coming up with a cure for coronavirus, just anything. It's important that we work in groups and teams and organizations. You can use organization sort of like an umbrella term for all the various permutations about how people come together and get things done. And we've done it through all of human history. We started off with families and with tribes, which are sort of ad hoc organizations, but nonetheless real, and clans. And as time developed, and especially as commercial projects and government projects came to the fore, we've developed sort of legal organizations and these, corporations, companies, limited partnerships in general, associations, clubs. Like we do this. There's different sort of standard types, if you like, different sort of archetypes of how people organize, whether it's commercial or not commercial or social, just depending. But you need something. And of course, once a certain form of organization forms in people's minds, if it works, it tends to be repeated. So the idea of a company with this limited liability and legal personhood and ability to make profit and sort of distribute it and enter into contracts, that's an international concept now. It may have started in Europe, I think either in the Netherlands or in England, but now the whole world understands the idea of a commercial company. You may call it different things. You may call it a limited, or in Germany, GmbH or something, or AG or something like that. or there's another term in French, but the idea kind of replicates. Now, we've had these different legal forms of organization, whether it's a company or a registered association or partnership or corporation. We've had those for several hundreds of years now. And they've served us moderately well, though people kind of rail against the evils of big corporations, but just the idea of it has been useful on the whole. But there's flaws, and there's some of those flaws are that you can't quite organize yourself the way you want to. You can't quite take the environment into account when you create these things. They are inherently national creatures or state or local creatures. There's no such thing yet as an international company. So even though these ideas were, or these templates for organizing our affairs were smart at the beginning, they're falling short. Well, what does blockchain and crypto offer? These networks, these platforms are inherently global, and they're fantastically flexible, and they're subject to evolution moment by moment as people add more code to them. They don't need to wait for the legislature to catch up and pass a law and for the lawyers to learn how to do it and people to reconcile between different jurisdictions. They're instantly workable. So DAOs, if you want to think about a continuum of organizing human affairs, DAOs are the next step in that continuum. It's a way to get lots of people coordinating their actions to get something done at scale when they have different interests and don't necessarily know and trust each other, but you can still work on this stuff. So it's interesting, we're using the word revolution. It's both a revolution and an evolution or evolution, depending whether you want to use American or British accent with that. It's a natural, necessary progression in the idea of organizing human affairs in a beneficial and efficient manner. So in that sense, it's an evolution. It's a revolution in the sense that we're stepping beyond, that we're leading with private code as a way of doing it, as opposed to a legal change. Law may catch up to it and recognize that concept of a DAO, but the DAO isn't waiting for law. It already is happening. It already exists. So it's a very exciting area.
Yeah, I mean, well, you just led me straight into my next question, and just before I go there, I'm just going to reiterate the last part of that sentence, which said, "and not influenced by a central government." Following on to the next part of that sentence, it goes on to say, "A DAO's financial transaction record and program rules are maintained on a blockchain. The precise legal status of this type of business organization is unclear." Now, going back to the fact just before that
I'm sorry, let me jump with you. So I hate to argue with the oracle of all truth, but there's kind of an explicit assumption there that this must be a business organization. That's not necessarily the case at all. You can form a DAO for any purpose whatsoever. You can have a nonprofit. I'm personally involved in nonprofit DAOs and DAOs that are looking to perform a public service. So that's a little bit of a blip in that article that I just want to highlight for the audience.
Gordon, are you suggesting that Wikipedia could be wrong? Anyway, I'm kidding.
I wouldn't want. I wouldn't want to say that on the record. No comment. Yeah, every once in a while.
But listen,
sometimes,
let's put that bit aside for a second. I mean, it does mention, which I do believe you won't disagree with, that it's not a DAO is not influenced by a central government. But then it does go on to say, okay, let's take out the word business organization, but the precise legal status of this type of organization is unclear. Now, bearing in mind, of course, we know that the blockchain and then with it crypto and all is in its infancy. It's a new entity. It's a new way of working, a new way of operating. But it does sound a bit dodgy, if you don't mind to say. The legal status is not clear. Does this mean that DAOs, or more specifically blockchain, sit outside of the law and that they are lawless?
Well, there's a difference between lawless and criminal. And when something, it's a good question. So if something is new and the law hasn't caught up to define it and regulate it yet, that doesn't necessarily make it criminal. We're not in the Soviet Union where unless something is allowed, it's automatically forgiven. If you're in the free world, the idea is unless it's forbidden, it's allowed. So the default is that things are allowed unless there's a reason that's not allowed. So, and courts and governments kind of look at the essence of something. You can't come up with a creative way of murdering someone. Hey, I'm clever, it's the first time, and claim that it's not lawless. Of course it's lawless, and of course it's criminal. But DAOs are not inherently bad things. They're just another way of organizing. So that, I don't know, is Uber dodgy? There's a famous situation in the United States. The United States Postal Service traditionally has delivered mail, right? And then UPS and FedEx and all these other companies started for private package delivery. And there was a question about whether they were legally allowed to do that. I mean, doesn't the US Post Office have a monopoly on delivering mail? And the general idea was, well, just because they've done it in the past and we're the only ones doing it in the past, that doesn't mean there's a rule that they're the only ones who can do it. So FedEx and UPS said, okay, we're just, we're going to deliver. If you don't like it, pass a new law, but we're not illegal under the old law. And it's kind of for Uber also. Uber was in that gray zone of taxi, not taxi. If we were waiting for enabling legislation for Uber to exist, Uber would never have existed, and we'd still be paying for these horrible taxi rates. So
I just want to stop you and say that's probably the best illustration I've ever heard when it comes to the Postal Service, because of course the Postal Service in most countries is engaged and associated with the government. Or it's an entity tied into the government, and of course, as you just explained, I mean that is, make it simple for people that are struggling with this concept, like myself, just to explain it. It's the same as along comes UPS, who just because they decide they're going to do it doesn't mean to say that it's illegal. It's just a different way of doing it, and it's a brilliant illustration.
Thank you. And by the way, let me step you and everyone else in the audience down the anxiety level with new stuff. One of my favorite expressions is, and it's not mine, but I heard it and I'm using it all the time. It's explain it to me like I'm 5. Okay, and I'm more than 10 times that age, just to kind of give it away. And I'm a lawyer, and I don't let my ego get in the way. It's like I always tell people, explain it to me like I'm 5. And then we'll go from there. So it's okay. We're all learning new. You can't know this entire area. It's just too big and moving too fast. So our job is all just to help everyone else. And yes, as my progenitor, the other Einstein said, you want to explain things as simply as possible, but no simpler. So that's what I strive for.
I think that's absolutely brilliant. And you just mentioned, of course, that things are moving so fast, and I'm guessing that's why it's incredibly important for everybody within this network who's involved in whatever you want to call it, whether it be the DAO or the platform or whatever you want to call it, to meet or to engage with each other as often as possible, because it is moving so fast. And that, I love that illustration. You're talking about collective, bringing people together to discuss, to shape, to change, and to be revolutionary. Now I'm understanding it. Now it's sinking in. Listen, I want to move on and ask you another question. Thank you so much. Listen, we're talking about law because this is particularly your field. So I want to bring this back to you. But how does law then engage? We've seen how a DAO would sit outside of the government, and just with that beautiful illustration, let's talk about law. How does law engage with the players in this process? Because surely the players are resistant to the imposing of law that might look as if that's governance or government. And I'm wondering if that doesn't defy the whole point of being decentralized.
There is a tension there. So if the DAOs like Bitcoin don't care about law because they're inanimate code-based objects. They're not passing moral judgments. They just operate according to code. They're agnostic when it comes to law. Just like a hammer or pen. This pen I'm holding in my hand, it doesn't care about law. It's just an object. It doesn't know anything. It's not pro-law. It's not against law. The real question is, what do I as a human being do with this thing? And is that legal or illegal? And then I as a human being am certainly subject to law. I have a body. I have a presence. I have resources, I have property, I have relationships. I am subject to law. So DAOs themselves may not be cognizant of law unless it's programmed into their code. And then it's not like even a moral thing, it's just they're doing math and the math says to comply. But we as human beings and we as organizations working with DAOs are subject to law. So if we're using a DAO to transmit money without doing anti-money laundering or know your customer AML/KYC checks, we as individuals can certainly be subject to regulation. If you and I make use of a DAO to enter into a contractual type relationship, probably, though not necessarily, if you and I had a dispute, we could handle that in a court of law. There's no rule that says it just needs to be handled on blockchain. So this is the area of, it's not that law doesn't apply, it's that the extent of law's application and the way it will be applied is as yet undefined. Now, I feel that there's a place, I think DAOs will become recognized legal forms, and your beautiful jurisdiction of Malta is making headway in this area. It's not just some fantasy of mine. I mean, Malta is in fact looking at legislation. The challenge there is DAOs are so inherently flexible that how do you regulate something that's so inherently so flexible? But then again, we've done it before. You can look at not strict rules, but you can take what's called a principles-based approach, which is, we're not going to, check all these boxes. We're kind of going to look at what this thing actually is, have some principles that we apply, and come to a reasoned point of view. That the challenge with that is it sacrifices certainty, but it also allows for flexibility. So I think there'll be a meeting of law and DAOs. I'll also point out that I think what I'd like to see is law become more computational and less sort of human written language. And then we'll be able to apply it to entities like DAOs with a lot more ease and predictability.
Well, you mentioned just back there, you mentioned about obviously Malta, where Sigma is based. And in the last weeks, we've seen Crypto.com receive the very first
yes.
tentative legislation. And it would seem exactly like you're saying, you just mentioned that it's actually very, very difficult to implement because of the variables. And again, I should imagine, because as you mentioned before, the market, the industry, the climate, everything that's associated with blockchain or crypto is moving so fast. I mean,
and it's global. There's no such thing as, the idea of a Malta DAO is ridiculous, right? I mean, you're not going to have a DAO just serving Malta. You're not going to have a DAO just serving the United States. It's just, these creatures are global from the moment they start, unlike a company, right? I mean, your corner flower shop in Malta isn't serving Paris, likely, but the moment you set up a DAO, it's global. So think about it, whichever jurisdiction makes the law and you set up there, they're kind of like putting a stake in a whole new territory that the rest of the world just has to deal with. Interesting times.
Well, let me ask you something. It just as you're talking, it just made me think. If it's moving this fast, if there's this many variables, if it's a DAO is the entity that it is, what is the likelihood then of AML, of anti-money laundering, or of money laundering, I should say, or taking advantage of that? And if law is, as you mentioned, in its relationship to DAOs, and obviously we're talking about blockchain right now, does that not just make it very vulnerable?
It can be vulnerable. The thing is, I made the point earlier that a DAO isn't necessarily a for-profit business, but that's separate from the idea that it might have an internal economy. Nonprofits can have an economy. A knitting club can have an economy. That doesn't make them for profit. I think DAOs, economics in the broad sense, apply to DAOs just like they apply to every other field of human endeavor. And there's nothing stopping a DAO from issuing its own internal tokens, and for the people involved in that DAO environment and in related DAOs to trade amongst themselves with those tokens to allocate resources and tasks and rewards. And to the extent that that is a closed system where those tokens are not transferable, exchangeable for fiat, you might get around AML and KYC because AML and KYC wouldn't apply. I mean, if we're just passing tokens between us and our friends back and forth, and we didn't exchange funds or send them abroad, it's not quite clear whether those principles apply. You get in another level of complexity because you may have DAOs that are doing transactions, maybe called business if you like, with other DAOs, and do those sort of heterogeneous token transactions, do those invoke AML KYC? And again, the law is not clear. We'll find out. Just to be real blunt, and it may sound funny coming from a lawyer, but I don't want governments and regulators to be able to control this. I want it to be so morphing and so fast and so diverse and so computational and so lightning speed that they can't and so common and normal and easy that it's just beyond control. I think that'll be better for humanity. I'm aware of the downsides, and I'm aware of the necessity of complying for now, but I want its ability to engage in these transactions to be just like taking a breath. I don't need a government license to take a breath of air. Okay, and I don't need a government license to have a conversation with someone. I think these exchanges of values are very much like freedom of speech. They're just conversations of value. And at least in the United States, we have a very strong protection of freedom of speech, though it's not quite as strong as it used to be with the First Amendment. Europe, God bless it, doesn't have quite that same level, but it's pretty good. Other countries are really bad when it comes to freedom of speech, or other groupings of nations. And I think this is a way to kind of bust open that political dialogue. Now, I know I took the conversation in a whole different direction, but this is sort of my theological, ideological underpinning for why I'm interested in this area.
Not completely on contraire. As we started off on contraire.
Yeah.
We started off talking about revolution, and that's where we're coming back to. We're finishing this conversation with you're talking about revolution. You're talking about freedom and revolution, and I just want to say thank you so much for breaking that all down and making it so abundantly clear. Because it is all of these areas, these DAOs, the blockchain, crypto, to so many people are so confusing, and these terms, and even just breaking down initially breaking down the term, it still sounds confusing. Listen, I'm going to leave it with you because I know that you're in Dubai, for crying out loud. You've got to go and meet people and do what you're doing. I want to thank you for your time. But listen, Gordon, what are we going to be talking about next time?
Well, let me throw it out. I am in Dubai, so anyone who's seeing this in somewhat real time, please reach out to me. Reach out to me on Telegram. It's just Gordon Einstein. It's easy. Reach out to me on Facebook. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm here to meet people. I'm here to exchange ideas. I'm here to continue conversations like what we're having right this second. I want to cross-germinate these concepts and build new things. So please connect. And to answer your question is, you and I share a common interest in making the world a better place. And that interest, I think, with you is very strongly related to environmentalism, which is something that's interesting to me also. I want us to land on Mars. I want us to save the planet. I want us to have, safe and sane economic growth, tons of it. I want to alleviate poverty, which only comes from creating wealth, but I want to not destroy the planet in the process. I want my children and my grandchildren to do well down towards the 10th generation. I don't want to, worrying about only the present, not thinking about the future. There's so many things to address. And I think it's important to, and it's inspirational and motivational once we realize that these concepts of blockchain and crypto and these other clusters of things that we're getting now, artificial intelligence, everything else, can be used productively and interactively / synergistically to propel humanity forward in a positive way. I think finally, after all this time, the future's beginning to arrive in 2020. I was kind of expecting stuff earlier, but now it's finally kind of getting here. We have a golden opportunity to do wonderful things. There's an expression I like, which is, we were born too late to explore the world. We were born too soon to explore the galaxy, but we're born just in time to save the planet. So that's what I'm into, and I want to talk about that.
You are Mr. Inspiration today. Thank you so much, Gordon. And I am really looking forward to talking about that next time. Have a really good time where you're at. And I'm glad that you're there having great conversations about blockchain, about DAOs, about crypto. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing more about that next time. Have a great time. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for tuning in to Sigma TV. For more stories and news like this, make sure you subscribe to sigma.world.